Having recently revisited some Pokemon games on the DS, I've actually gotten into playing other Nintendo games on a console that I really haven't done very much with in the past year or two, and that's the Wii, and playing GameCube games on it via, of course, that built-in emulation or compatibility that it has, either natively through a disc or through Nintendo if you have a modded Wii, and I think that that's a great resource. And I say that because the game I'm going to talk about today is one that is among, I think, a growing group of GameCube games that the majority of people will never have access to. This is, of course, a combination of the scarcity of these games, just how rare they are, and then the constantly increasing prices of GameCube games in general. The game I want to talk about today, Gotcha Force, I think the perfect combination of a game that's extremely expensive while also being extremely scarce. It was a GameCube exclusive, which automatically doesn't give you the option of buying it for a lower cost on the Xbox or the PlayStation 2, which for a lot of multi-platforms is the better option. So it doesn't have that opportunity to buy it on a different platform, in addition to the fact that it was really critically panned when it initially came out. So if you've heard of Gotcha Force, odds are you know more about this game than I do. I've only been playing it for the last week or two, and if you've never heard of Gotcha Force, I can't blame you, because the game is just such a cult classic in the way that not many people are actually aware of it or have actually played it. So basically the synopsis of it is it's a robot fighting game where the little robots are actually gotcha figures that you would maybe get out of like some sort of coin operated machine. It's a cheap collectible figure, and you as the player try to collect all 200 of these while battling through a campaign. It really does give you the characters at random, so in a way the game was kind of like a loot box before loot boxes costed money. Obviously there's no microtransactions in a game from the GameCube, but it definitely has that random loot box element to it, and the different characters you get, and waiting to see what one opens through this dramatic animation that we see in a lot of games that have loot boxes today is just really thrilling, and something that I really enjoy and keeps me coming back to the game. The story itself is paper thin, but the combat here, which is 2-button combat, you're really just using B or X, using different moves. Some of the moves, depending on the character class, maybe it's just it can shoot a few times, maybe it's a punching move, and you can use it over and over again. It really depends on the character. So while there are different strengths and advantages to each character, it's really about finding characters that fit your playstyle, but you're getting them through this sort of random element. I at one point had the system accidentally turn off on me, and I lost some save progress. Went back and had to replay a section. Got a character that I wish I wouldn't have gotten compared to the character that I had gotten previously, but I hadn't saved in between. It's a very early 2000s problem, something I had not encountered in a while, but it came up while playing this game. I love that random element, though, to it. If you do end up setting yourself up to play through this game, you get the experience to play it yourself, which I think is definitely actually worth giving a try. I think you'll quickly realize that I feel like this game was made to create one of those Pokemon-style multimedia companies where they were going to have a manga, they were going to have an anime, they were going to have, a toy line, because this would have fit very well into having a toy line. I know that some of those things did end up existing in Japan, where maybe it had a little bit more success. In the US, however, nothing like that ever happened, and interestingly, in 2012 in Japan, the game was reprinted. That's right, a GameCube game was reran prints of in 2012, mind you. This is very close to the release of the Xbox One, just a year away, and they're reprinting prints of a GameCube game because the game just had that much of a cult following. And I think that a large portion, assumably, of that cult following played the game initially through something like Dolphin, through something like a modded Wii. Again, we're talking about there being a cult following in 2012. There's been mods out for the Wii, but in 2012, already for a few years. There have been different ways people could obtain, an ISO file and play this game, be it on a computer in 2012 using Dolphin, or just a backup copy through a Wii in 2012 using something like Nintendo or another similar software. So I feel like this game is an example of the reason why the ROM community needs to exist, to kind of counteract that collecting community that maybe desires to just put a game like this on a shelf and not actually play it just simply because it is a collectible game. Which is why it baffles me that some people are so stingily opposed to the use of ROMs and the ROM community, which I think is a community that's done a fantastic job in preserving games like this. Would Gacha Force ever end up being lost media and just disappear off the face of the earth? I think absolutely not. I don't know how many copies this game sold in America for the English release, but I'm sure there are still tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 copies of this game out there. It's just hard to come by. So they definitely didn't preserve it in the fact that otherwise it would have been lost media, but I think they preserved it in the fact that the game is more accessible now than it otherwise would have been. And if not for supporting that, I would say at least try and urge publishers, and many of them will never do this, but urge publishers to reprint some of these older games that are maybe from consoles that are no longer relevant and just sell them directly on their website. I mean, I know Square Enix does this. They sell games directly on their website. There were, at least as recently as a year or two ago, still PlayStation 2 new copies of games like Final Fantasy X just sitting there available on Square Enix's website. I don't know if they had that much of a backstock or if they had, you know, been reprinting copies like Capcom did in 2012 with Gacha Force. But I would love to see physical copies of some of these older games be reprinted. I don't need it to be the original copy. It's fine if it has some sort of ribbon on it that designates that it's a reprint. I just like owning a physical copy of a game if I absolutely can. But I want to buy that game to play and experience that game. I don't want to buy the game for the sole purpose of putting it on a shelf and keeping it as some sort of collectible. And I get that reprinting physical copies of an old game is probably not worth it for a lot of these publishers, even for just, you know, small orders that they might be selling on their website. So if they can't do that, it would at least be nice to see these games re-released digitally. But the problem is with a platform like the GameCube, you just simply can't do that. And since there's no GameCube compatibility on something like, say, the Wii, it would take a matter of a port. It's a lot more work. So rerunning physical copies and seeing reprints is something that I think is very realistic, but won't actually end up ever happening. And it's really a shame because it's something that I would enjoy. So for the lack of other options when it comes to being able to play some of these older games, I think we really need to give the ROM community more credit for the service that they're providing in terms of being able to preserve and make these older games be accessible to the widest possible audience. Because at the end of the day, unless the original publishers want to re-release them and do a limited run sort of thing, there's no way we can even pay the original publishers for these games. That's my thoughts on Gacha Force and kind of the state of some of these more rarer games from the early 2000s and even earlier than that. Thanks for watching. I'm Bailey, and I'll see you in the next video.